Sirens blared as flashes of blue and red illuminated the tree line. A crowd had gathered at the edge of the woods. Amidst the loud commotion, police officers investigated the crime scene. The ground was puddled with blood. Some of it was sprayed on the surrounding trees in eerie patterns. A young girl of 11 was the victim. The cops were carrying the body, now covered in white cloth, to the ambulance. I stood at the front of the crowd, watching the ambulance drive away. The parents of the girl were in hysterics. I looked at the spot where they found her. An officer was observing the ground with a flashlight. I was the first to spot the body. That girl's lifeless corpse is something I'll never forget. The look of panic was glued to her face. Her eyes were wide open. Her mouth was twisted into an open frown, as if she was screaming for her life. There were lacerations all over her body. The most distinguishing and horrifying feature was that both of her arms were ripped clean off their sockets. Blood poured from the exposed wounds. You could see her shoulder joints jutting out. This was the first time I've witnessed the death of a human being in person. I was deeply disturbed, shaken. The sight of the body was unsettling, but what was more unsettling was the fact that this was the third incident this past month. Just 10 days ago, 2 hikers went missing on the trail. They had set out at 6 in the morning towards one of the common trails. The wives of the duo reported them missing after they didn't show up for 7 hours. A search and rescue team was assembled. I was a part of the volunteers for the first 2 days. They were found on the 3rd day, the day I decided to stay back in my tower. I was given a description by my colleagues, Rob and Martin. Both arms were missing from the corpses. That seemed to be a common theme for the victims. And today, I got to witness it firsthand. I watched the lights of the ambulance fade into the darkness as it drove down the muddy road. An officer approached me. "I heard you're the new guy," he said as he offered a handshake. "My name is Officer Clark. I was told you were the first witness." I nodded and gave him my statement. I was on my routine patrol down this particular trail. The path was right in front of my tower. I found the body around 300 meters down the trail, a little girl lying motionless on the side of the dirt path. Images of the body flashed through my mind. "You seem shooken up," Officer Clark said as he put his hand on my shoulder. "Don't worry, it's most likely an animal attack. Of course we will be investigating from our side, but I doubt it is anything more than an unfortunate incident." I looked at the crime scene. The other cops were taking samples and pictures. What kind of animal does that? Goosebumps crawled out from the depths of my instinctual terror and spread through my bare skin. I felt cold. Officer Clark leaned in closer. "It was an animal attack. You don't have to worry. Leave the formalities to us." Behind his reassuring tone, I could feel a sense of firmness. He walked away to speak to Rob and Martin. They were park rangers posted in the towers next to mine. As you can tell by now, I'm a fire lookout at this place. It's been a month since I've joined. I stay in Tower 20. Rob and Martin stay in the neighboring towers 21 and 22. From day one, they've helped me get acquainted with my responsibilities and life as a ranger. At this point, I consider them good friends. I watched as they spoke to Officer Clark. They spoke for a while. Considering those two have been working here for much longer than I have, it was conceivable that they'd have much more useful information to provide the authorities. However, 3 minutes into their conversation, I noticed Rob and Martin started occasionally glancing at me. Their eyes darted back and forth from Officer Clark to me and back at him. For some reason, I felt like they were talking about me. I couldn't shake off the feeling that there was more to this story, stuff I wasn't being told yet. After they were done, Rob and Martin approached me. "Quite a day," Rob said with a sigh. He handed me a bottle of water. "Did the officer mention anything?" I asked them. "No, he didn't say much. They'll most likely declare it as an animal attack." Martin chimed in. "Do you really believe that?" I asked. "Grizzlies can be pretty aggressive," Rob said, sitting down on a rock. "They've instructed us to stay inside our towers past 8:30 in the afternoon. It's best we get going now." I stared at Rob. I wanted to know more. "I know it's been a rough day for you," Martin said as he put his arm around my shoulder. "You're probably very disturbed right now, so just try to relax for the night. Rob stood up and faced me. Just stay in your tower after hours, okay, until we get any updates from the authorities. I began walking up the stairs to my tower. The whole situation didn't sit right with me. I've been an avid outdoorsman my entire life. I've been taught about the wilderness, even bears. A bear would not rip the arms off of its prey and leave the rest of the body behind, especially not 3 times in a row. I opened the door to my tower as I thought to myself, this isn't an animal attack. This was a murder. I just couldn't sleep that night, so I sat at my window, looking at the wide expanse of forest in front of me. A pair of binoculars rested on the table beside the window. I grabbed the binoculars and pointed them westwards, towards the trail that runs in front of my tower, to the very spot I came across the body. Through the foliage, I could see the forest floor, and under the light of the waxing gibbous moon, I could see 3 dark figures prowling the night. The first figure led the way, the other 2 were following behind. They were carrying something, a big bag of some sorts. The 3 figures were making their way to the area where the girl's body was found. I wanted to grab my phone and call 911, but I stopped. I looked closely through the binoculars and noticed something. I wasn't quite sure if it was what I thought it was, but I had to know. I slowly stepped off the stairway of my tower and started crouch walking along the bushes. I stopped quite some distance away from the crime scene. I was right. There were 3 men wearing black uniforms. They were cops. I froze in place, not knowing what to think. I looked at the object the 2 men at the back were carrying. It was a body bag. I crouched lower, afraid of being noticed. Suddenly, I heard something heavy fall to the ground. I peered through the leaves. There was an actual corpse lying on the ground. The 3 men were already making their way back down the trail. Crouching back behind the bushes, I covered my mouth. I heard them walk by towards my right. I sat there for a good 5 minutes, not wanting to be spotted. The crickets chirped around me. A good minute passed, and the light from the moon started to diminish. Clouds began to cover the sky, and I realized that the forest was now dead silent. I slowly stood up and looked towards the body. There was nothing, just the empty forest floor. The body was gone. I scoured my surroundings in confusion and paranoia. There was a body lying right there on the ground a minute ago. I had seen it. The sight of the girl's corpse filled my mind. That was enough exploration for tonight. I quickly turned around and started a brisk walk back to my tower. I managed to take maybe 20 steps before I heard footsteps behind me. Something was following me. I turned around and stared at the oak tree 30 feet away. I could see the silhouette of a head peering out at me. There was someone hiding behind the tree. I almost screamed. The paranoia of the body bag just disappearing was already getting to me, and now I was being trailed by a person in this dark forest. In my state of confusion and fear, I reached for the flashlight in my pocket. As I fumbled for the switch, I noticed the figure move out from behind the tree and step into view. I flipped the switch. The illuminated patch of forest floor in front of me revealed a horror my heart wasn't ready for. It was her, the girl. I must have blinked a million times just to be sure. It was the same white frock with yellow flowers on it, although now stained with mud and blood. The pigtails were intact, but messy. I stared at the same lifeless eyes I saw a few hours ago. They looked almost glassy, artificial. I noticed the cuts on her body. Something didn't seem right. They weren't random lacerations. It seemed as if they formed some sort of pattern on her body. The sound of crunching leaves broke me out of my trance. My blood ran cold at the realization. This girl, this corpse. It took a step forward. A light fog creeped in behind the girl. Crunch. She took another step. The snapped tendons dangling from her shoulder joint swung around with every step. That was all I needed to turn around and get the heck out of there. I started sprinting like a madman back to my tower. It wasn't far. I tried to listen for footsteps behind me. There was nothing. I wasn't sure if that thing was giving chase, but I was in no position to turn around and check for myself. I could see my tower. Just a bit more and then I'll be safe. I ran onto the dirt trail and grabbed the railing of the stairs. I skipped through the steps and reached the top in record time. My heart was racing. I felt goosebumps on the back of my neck. Any moment, I expected to feel the cold, clammy touch of the corpse girl on the nape of my neck. I opened the door to my tower and jumped inside. I collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air. I turned around to face the door and froze. At the top step of the staircase, right next to the door, were those dead, glassy eyes staring at me. I ran to the door and slammed it shut. I locked the deadbolt and dragged my chair in front of the door. My heart was beating a mile a minute. What the heck was going on? This obviously can't be real. I heard a scraping sound on my front door. Get the hell away from me, I screamed at the top of my lungs. I crawled to my bed. My hand reached out for the light switch. The light bulb flickered, on and off multiple times. It showered me in light, then plunged me into the dark. Did that thing screw with the circuitry? I had enough of this. I decided to crouch under the bed and stay there for the rest of the night. As I prepared to enter my little hideout, I heard the sound of static. It was my radio. I looked at the console. Someone was trying to contact me. Despite the tense situation, I felt a sense of comfort that I was about to have contact with a fellow human being. Without a moment of hesitation, I ran to the receiver and picked it up. "Hello," I heard Martin's voice. "Martin," I screamed in relief. "Where the hell have you been? I've been trying to reach you," he asked, concerned. "Martin, you have to listen to me," I said. I could hear the panic in my voice. "I saw her. She's out there, right outside my door." "Hey, calm down. What's going on?" Martin replied in confusion. "She's outside my door. I was on the trail and a group of men brought her back here in a body bag, and she followed me to the tower." Tears were rolling down my eyes. I couldn't control myself. "Slow down. Take a deep breath." Martin tried to calm me down. "Who is at your door?" "That girl," I cried. "The dead girl we found yesterday. She's after me, Martin." Silence. I waited for Martin to say something. Nothing. My agitation grew as Martin's silence continued. "Hey, come on. Say something," I begged. "That's impossible," Martin said. "What?" I was so confused. "Martin, she's right outside my..." I froze. The scraping noise had stopped. In fact, the entire tower was dead silent. The only sound that resonated within the wooden walls was my own frantic heartbeat. I slowly walked towards the window that had a view of the front door. I took a look through the glass. There was nothing, absolutely nothing. Not a single speck of dust, nor a drop of blood stained the tower stairs. That girl's body was cremated 4 hours ago. After all the tests, I heard Martin's voice speak to me. I sat down on my bed. A million thoughts were racing through my mind. "No," I shot back. "You're lying. Listen to me," Martin said sternly. "Her body was cremated 4 hours ago." His words, it felt like more of an order than a response. It's like he was telling me that if I thought of it any other way, I would be in trouble. I sat on my bed in fear, waiting for the sun to rise. Martin and Rob have been working here for 5 years now. Clearly, they know something I don't. And clearly, the authorities are hiding a dangerous secret, a secret that has taken 4 lives in the past month. There is something going on here, and I need to know. The sun rose up from the night sky, blessing the forest with the onset of dawn. The birds began chirping their routine ballads. The chirps were like white noise to me. I hacked at a branch that loomed over the trail with my machete. The branch snapped halfway and dangled at the side of the path. I stared at the aftermath of my sloppy swing. Admittedly, I was still dazed by last night's events. I wasn't even sure if all of it was even real. If some muddy corpse was huddled in front of your doorstep, you'd at least expect to find a drop of blood. I scanned the entire staircase in the morning. To my absolute bewilderment, the staircase was spotless. Nothing made any sense. I stood there, staring at the branch. My mind was numb. Beautiful day for a hike. A voice came from behind me. I snapped out of my trance and spun around. A man was walking towards me. He had camping gear on him. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to startle you," he said as he extended his hand. "I'm Nico." I slowly shook his hand, trying to calm myself down. Nico spent the next 15 minutes striking conversation, telling me about his hiking trips and how it was his first time on this trail. He started asking me about camping spots. I gave him a look of confusion. This man wanted to pitch a tent for the night. Images of that disgusting corpse flashed through my mind. "You shouldn't camp here for the night," I told him. "Excuse me, you shouldn't stay here after hours. The authorities have advised everyone to stay off the trails after 8:30 p.m. I gave him the same warning Officer Clark did. I figured that's the least I could correctly say. Nico was perplexed. "That's strange," he muttered. "The ranger I met earlier on this trail said there's a lovely campsite a mile down west." He pointed down the dirt path. "Ranger," I thought to myself. Rob's tower was right before mine. This guy must have met Rob. That's when the realization struck me. Rob didn't give this man any warnings. Miko knew nothing about the 8:30 curfew, the missing people, nothing. Were these people withholding information from the civilians too? You sure you're a ranger, buddy? Miko asked me as he started walking down the trail. Either way, have a great day. He waved at me and disappeared into the trees. My head was spinning. As I walked up to my tower, I realized all of this was a huge cover-up for something. I sat down at my desk. In front of me was my radio set and my cell phone. The numbers 911 were dialed on the keypad. These were the only two contacts I could realistically reach from this forest reserve, and both of them were potentially hostile. The police won't help me or get me out of here because they're probably the ones running this whole operation. I thought of escaping from the confines of this park, but Rob and Martin's tower were between me and the park entrance. If I am intercepted by them, who knows what will happen to me. For now, I'm alive because I'm behaving myself. I figured my survival depends on my ability to keep up appearances and stay out of their way. What I didn't understand, however, was why cover up the deaths, especially from visitors. What could they possibly gain? I looked at the bookshelf beside my desk. I've been here for a month already, and I never really bothered to open it. Today though, I felt the urge to open it. I opened it up. A sea of dust poured out of the wooden chamber. I covered my mouth, waiting for the dust to settle. There were quite a few books in there, stuff from an Atlas of America to a field guide for birds and butterflies. I scanned all the 3 shelves. When I reached the bottom left corner, I noticed a few stray pages wedged between 2 books. I slowly retrieved the papers. The paper looked like it was a year or so old. These were ruled pages, most likely taken from a diary. They were notes scribbled all over. On the first page was the title Armless Corpse Murders. My eyes widened as I read the contents of the page. 2016, Jean-Pierre P. October 13th, statement, animal attack. Mohammed Abdul, October 16th, statement, animal attack. There were names of people who died or went missing since 2016. The details included whether their body was found or not, whether the body had its arms missing, and the cause of death as stated by the officers. Every single case in which the body was found was labeled as an animal attack. Who wrote this? What was this doing in my tower? I speculated that the person working before me must have been secretly keeping notes for the new guy that would succeed them. That new guy being me. I had a list of 7 years worth of murders in my hand. 7 entire years. I turned to the last page. On the bottom was a symbol, a lowercase I, with small lines radiating outward around it in a circle. I stared at the weird symbol. Then it hit me. That girl. The cuts on her corpse formed the same pattern. I got up and began locking all the windows. The door had a deadbolt. I had a feeling my survival through the night was going to depend on more than just a latch. I opted to skip my evening patrol in favor of reinforcing my fortress. I dragged the desk and pushed it against the door. That should provide some stopping power. I put duct tape on the window locks. That was probably a useless move, but I was desperate. As the night creeped in, I crouched down on the floor next to my bed with my machete firmly in my hand. A couple of hours went by. So far, nothing had approached my tower, or at least nothing I could hear. My angst was slowly dissipating. Maybe tonight wasn't going to be so bad. Then, all of a sudden, I noticed it. A peculiar feeling that was growing inside me. A guttural, primal sensation. I realized that I needed to take a piss. I stood up. The outhouse was on the ground at the base of the tower. There was no chance in hell I was going to go down there this late. I looked at the window next to the door and an idea struck me. I removed the duct tape and unlocked the window. Slowly but surely, I thrust my hips outward and took aim. Once I was in a somewhat comfortable position, I let her rip. I stared into the dazzling night sky as my fountain glistened under the moonlight. I must say, the experience of unadulterated freedom was immaculate. I noticed a light fog off in the distance, deep into the forest reserve. I thought about it for a while. That fog was never not there. Every single day I've gazed upon this vast expanse, I've always seen it. I looked towards the ground below, near the trail. The pressure of the stream slowly began to subside. It waned and waned until I felt the clutches of my own fear hold my piss in. She's there, standing at the edge of the tree line. That dead girl is back. She's staring at me with those lifeless eyes. I took a step back. The girl didn't break eye contact. I noticed movement in the tree line. 2 dark figures were approaching the tree line. They trudged on, slouching, and stepped foot into the moonlight. They were two men, but they looked battered and bruised. Neither of them had arms. I took a closer look at their faces. They seemed familiar. I remembered the missing posters 2 weeks ago. These were the hikers that went missing before the incident with the girl. All three of these people are supposed to be dead. A cold sweat dripped down my forehead. The girl took a step forward. This night had just begun. I pulled my hips in and slammed the window shut. The duct tape. It was on the desk. I grabbed the tape and ran back to the window. The three undead corpses were still at the tree line. I froze. They were staring at me. Suddenly, they started running to the tower in unison. The little girl jumped 5 feet into the air and landed on one of the stilts of the tower. I looked down. The girl was gripping the wooden pole with her mouth and legs. I heard the sound of scraping as gravity pulled her body back to the ground, dragging her teeth along the wood. The other two were quick to follow suit. All three undead jumped at the stilts, trying to climb them like inchworms. The frantic squirms of the armless corpses as they bit down and dragged their teeth up the height of the stilt were horrifying. Streaks of blood stained the wood of the tower. The corpses were relentless, stopping at nothing, not even the mutilation of their own jaws, to get to me. They were almost at the top. I snapped back to my senses. I doubled down on the duct tape for each lock. The window at the back of the tower was the only one left to tape down a second time. I grabbed the tape and faced the glass. There, right on the other side, was a dead hiker's disfigured mouth. Teeth jutted out of his gums and lips. His front teeth were either missing or bent at extreme angles. He probably couldn't even close his mouth properly. His body violently twitched, desperately trying to stand up on the edge of the planks. In a panic, I ran to the radio set. I desperately tried to reach either Rob or Martin. I picked up the box. Hello, is anyone there? I cried into the microphone. Please, Martin, Rob, please respond. I heard static. I stopped talking and listened closely. All of a sudden, a loud screaming erupted from the radio. It was a little girl's scream. My blood ran cold. Instinctively, I dropped the radio on the floor and crawled to my bed. A man's screams joined the little girl as a cacophony of pain filled the cabin. Before I could even react, I heard loud bangs on the windows. They were trying to break in. Something began smashing the door in. Luckily, the desk was holding. The banging on the windows grew more aggressive. I wasn't sure how long the glass would hold. I grabbed the machete on the bed and held it close to my chest. The banging and screaming kept growing and growing in intensity. I could feel my soul shake. I closed my eyes. Silence. Everything just stopped. I looked around at the windows. What the hell just happened? I gave it a minute. I still didn't feel like risking it. Still nothing. Did they give up? I slowly stood up. The cabin was desolate. I approached the window next to the door. The three corpses were standing at the tree line again, but this time they were facing away from me into the forest. I lowered myself a bit, afraid of being noticed. There was a fourth person there. Something was different, however. This one had hands. I looked at the person's face. Nico. It was the dude I met on my morning patrol. He was walking into the forest. No, something was holding his hand. An arm. An arm was extended out from the darkness of the forest. He was being led into the woods by someone. I couldn't see the person who was taking Nico into the woods by hand. But the arm, it was so slender and lanky. It was pale and clammy looking. It looked more like a stage prop. I wanted to call out to Nico and stop him, but I couldn't. I was frozen over in fear. All I could do was watch the long, pale arm lead Nico into the dark forest. I stared at the black void behind the trees. All of a sudden, another arm reached out from the darkness. This time, the arm was pointed at me. My eyes widened. The three corpses turned to stare at me. The arm slowly flipped upright. The bony finger now slowly curled backwards. It was beckoning me to come. I didn't move. I couldn't. The arm slowly retreated into the darkness, slithering away like a snake. And with it, the corpses followed. My eyes were glued to the trail. I stood in front of the window. 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. I don't know how long I stood there. All I know is that the sound of my radio snapped me out of my trance. I picked up the radio and sat on my bed. The sun rose above the horizon once again, and with it came the worst announcement of my life. We've received a missing persons case on the trail. All on-site park staff are required to participate in the search group today at 7:30 in the morning. Please be present half an hour early for the briefing. I pushed the desk I used to barricade the door aside. The legs squeaked as they dragged along the floorboards. I figured I was gonna have to get going soon. There was a box of crackers in my pantry. I decided to have a little early morning snack. The crackers were so dry I was having a tough time swallowing. After about 2, I gave up and started putting on my boots. As I began tying my laces, I noticed that my hands were quivering. I knew I was scared to walk out that door, even if it was broad daylight. I finished tying my shoelace when I heard a knock at the door. I felt my heart beat faster. With my machete in hand, I slowly approached the window next to the door and peeked outside. Standing at my door was Rob. What the hell was he doing here? I opened the door. "Good morning." Rob greeted me. "I see you're ready." Admittedly, I didn't hide my skepticism well. Rob seemed to catch on. "You're assigned with me and Martin. He'll be here any minute now. Come on, let's get going." I realized that I didn't really have a way out of this. I decided to keep my machete close, just in case. I followed Rob down the wooden staircase. The stairs spiraled around the stilts of the tower. I expected to see tons of bite marks and dried blood on the wood. Much to my dismay, however, the woodwork was intact. I reached out to touch the stilts. Smooth, unchipped surfaces. I couldn't believe it. How the hell were there no traces of assault when 3 undead lunatics were jumping and biting all over the tower stilts 5 hours ago? We got off the stairs and onto the dirt. Martin stood at the edge of the trail, waving at us cheerfully. He was in the same spot where I saw the arm drag Nico off into the woods. My stomach churned at the thought of going. I had a feeling everything was going to go terribly wrong. The 3 of us walked down the dirt trail, due west. Apparently, they found his campsite just a few hundred yards from here. Martin said with a skip in his leg, "Let's go check it out." These 2 seemed too relaxed, given the scenario. We were on a missing persons trail and these 2 were treating it like a picnic. The campsite was located in a small clearing right next to the trail. A blue tent was pitched right next to 2 pine trees. The flap was left open and the structure was still intact. A campfire was built in front of the entrance, which had seemed to die down quite a while ago. It seemed evident that nobody had tended to the fire for a good 10 hours. There were no signs of aggression or intrusion. There was a sleeping bag and some other items in the tent. All seemed to be left as is. Martin sat down on a nearby rock and took out a water bottle. "Let's take a break here," he said, letting out a sigh. I stared at him, perplexed. "Why are you so relaxed, Martin?" I asked him. "Don't stress about it so much. There's a lot of people out there looking for him." He took a long sip of water. "There's a missing person out there, Martin," I said, remembering Nico's final moments. I could hear the tremble in my voice. "Shouldn't you all be working hard to find him?" Martin turned to look at me. The first time in a while, I saw a look of defeat in the eyes of the happy-go-lucky Martin. "It doesn't matter if we find him or not," he muttered. "What did you say?" "It doesn't matter if we find him or not. It never has. What matters is we act like we tried." I stared at Martin, wide-eyed. Every single hellish ordeal I had faced in the last 48 hours rushed through my head. Before I could get a hold of myself, I completely snapped. I ran full speed at Martin. "You absolute lying piece of shit." I screamed as I flailed my machete wildly in the air. I felt 2 arms grab me by my shoulders and hold me back. "Calm down," I heard Rob's voice. "What's gotten into you?" I kicked and screamed, trying to break out of his grasp. "I'm gonna punch your fucking nose in, you chicken shit liar," I screamed. Martin was startled by my outburst. "Don't pretend like this isn't all your fucking fault. I know you 2 are lying about everything. It's your fault that Nico is missing. You lied to him. You didn't tell him anything about what's going on here. You didn't bother warning him." Rob held me down. "What are you talking about?" "Shut up," I screamed in his face. "I know you fucking talked to him the day he disappeared, Rob. Maybe instead of suggesting camping spots to him, you should have told him about the string of murders that have been happening on these trails since 2016. Rob went silent. How did I what? How did I know? Are you gonna fucking ask me that question, Rob? Do you know what I've been through these last 2 nights? I was the last person to ever see Nico. I saw him getting dragged into the woods. Rob and Martin stared at me in silence. I broke down, sobbing. I told them everything that happened. The dead girl, the papers, Nico's disappearance, everything. Rob sat down on the ground beside me. Martin was petrified. He waited for me to calm down. "You know, we don't really know any more than you do," he said, lowering his head. "All these years, we've seen people go missing or turn up dead in horrifying ways. It's always been like this, and no matter how many times it happens, we're told the same thing: pretend like nothing has happened. Pretend that the park is just a normal place in front of visitors. We've been given only one precaution: stay inside after 8:30 p.m. That's it." He looked at the empty tent. Even these search operations are just a formality. We all know we're not gonna find anything, and even if we do, they're just gonna bring the corpses back to the woods for some reason. I've personally seen cops dump bodies back on this trail. I never expected you to actively go and check it out for yourself though. I never had the courage to leave my tower. Rob put his hand on my shoulder. The cops told us to stick with you for this search to make sure you don't run off and do anything out of order. We're here to protect you. Martin tossed me his water bottle. That's why it's best if you just accept the situation and sit here for a while. Don't mess with something you don't understand. His words trailed off in my ears, probably because my focus shifted elsewhere. I broke out into a cold sweat as I watched a light fog pour into the campsite. I guess this search operation is a success, I muttered to Rob. He was confused. I pointed over Martin's shoulder. He turned around to look. Behind him stood the very person we all were supposedly looking for. Martin stumbled to the ground in shock. A pale, lifeless Nico stood there, staring at us. Long, white, ropey strands of cartilage dangled from his sides, as if they were freshly torn apart. A figure stepped out of the fog and stood beside Nico. Dirty matted pigtails, roughly half the height of Nico. That girl was back again. I looked around frantically. One by one, armless corpses stepped out of the fog, almost surrounding us. Male, female, old, young. There must have been at least 30 corpses surrounding us. Out in the distance, behind Nico, were two peculiar-looking ash trees. Their shape struck me as odd for some reason, but I didn't have time to think about that now. I started panicking. The corpses eyed us one by one, then they all slowly turned their attention to Martin, who was several feet away from us, dragging his ass on the ground. I immediately realized what was happening. Without a single sound, all of the corpses sprang at Martin. I watched as the feral pack grabbed Martin with their jaws and started dragging him into the fog. He tried to dig his fingers into the dirt in an attempt to pull himself away, but two corpses frantically began chewing his fingers. Their movements were so unnerving. A rabid dog with no forelimbs would present itself tame in comparison to these savages. Somewhere between Martin's screams and the corpse's savagery, I completely lost it. I got up and started bolting it back to the trail. I looked up at the dirt path. There was a corpse standing between me and the trail. Without a moment's hesitation, I ran right into the corpse and swung my machete at its face. I heard a loud thud as it fell hard on the ground. I didn't stop running. I darted through the trees. The forest caved in around me. I followed the trail until I literally couldn't breathe anymore. I stopped to catch my breath. I was panting so hard that I almost couldn't hear something huge barreling right towards me. I looked up, startled by the sight of Rob running at me with tears in his eyes. He stopped in front of me and gasped for air. "Martin," he said, sobbing. "They took Martin." My body froze in fear. "What the hell are those things?" he asked. "That was the missing guy, right? None of them had arms. What the fuck is going on?" he cried. I saw something dart around the trees in my peripheral vision. Me and Rob faced the forest. The fog surrounded us. I saw shapes in the fog. Did they catch up to us? Was this the end? The figures in the fog surrounded us. I stared deep into the forest. I noticed an ash tree 100 feet away. I squinted at it to get a better look. Suddenly, the ash tree lifted off the ground. This wasn't the trunk of some tree, it was a giant leg. The ground shook at the might of the thunderous footsteps. I watched as the giant legs got closer and closer, stopping right in front of us. I looked up at the trees in horror. Bones cracked up in the leaves. I watched as several hands emerged from the foliage above, shaking side to side. The shaking hands gradually thinned out the fog around us until I could see the eldritch abomination clearly with my own eyes. It was massive. It must have been 20 feet tall at the shoulder. Its emaciated torso was mounted on long, lanky legs. Its face was featureless. No eyes, no nose, no ears, no mouth, no hair. Just an oval head with gray skin. Its most prominent feature, however, was the massive, horrifying entanglement of arms that grew out of its shoulders and back. The long bony arms swayed around gently like a tidal wave crashing into a cliff. The oscillations so enchantingly created a rift of shaking hands that put me in a kaleidoscopic trance, a peacock's dance of 1,000 arms. I watched, completely mesmerized, as the massive creature crouched over the forest floor. Two of its many arms slowly reached out to me. I froze. In fear or in utter awe, I did not know, but I didn't dare move. The arms went over my head behind me as Rob's screams filled my ears. I could only watch as the creature hoisted Rob in the air in front of it, holding each of his arms at the joint. Crack. Rob thrashed around in vain. I could hear his bones snap and his flesh rip. The creature effortlessly twisted Rob's arms off like a chicken wing. Rob's body was hanging by tendons and cartilage. I looked at the creature. 2 small buds began forming on either side of its shoulders. With one final pull, the creature pulled Rob's arms clean off. His body fell hard to the ground. I wasn't sure if he was completely dead. The creature brought its brand new set of arms closer to the sprouting buds of flesh. Long, ropey tendrils emerged from the pale white buds and wrapped themselves around the exposed joints of Rob's arms. I watched my friend's arms slowly merge with the creature's shoulder. Rob's arms flailed around in the air, embracing their new body. Then, his arms slowly lowered, approaching his corpse. Before I could realize what was going on, the creature clawed at Rob's body with his own arms. I watched the intricate pattern of flesh and blood being carved into Rob. It was marking him with that symbol. Was he going to turn into another undead corpse? My thoughts were interrupted when I realized that the creature was now looking at me. The armless corpses emerged from the fog. They closed in on me. I saw 2 massive arms reach out to me. This was it. This was the terrible way I went out. I started to freak out. My mind raced, desperately thinking of any way to salvage my life. The arms were almost here. I could feel the fingers mere inches away from my shoulders. Then, at the last possible second, I realized this was probably the only way I might get out of this. I knew if I let my mind think even for a second, I might not have the courage to do it. My right hand instinctively grabbed the machete. I watched my right hand almost robotically move over to my left shoulder. An immense pain shot through my body. I felt the dull, rough edge of the machete dig deep into my flesh. Not enough. I needed to strike harder. The machete ripped out of the deep wound in my left arm. I raised the butchering blade in the air once again and slammed it into my own arm. I howled in pain. Tears rolled down my cheeks. I could feel the blade against my bone. Sharp, immense needle-like pain coursed through my bones. I hacked at my arm again and again. All the while, the massive entity watched. I could tell it was feeling immense pleasure watching me chop off my own arm. Each strike created small fractures in my bones. Eventually, the cracks festered and arm was severed. It hung to my side loosely by virtue of some skin. One last strike. With all my might, I swung down my machete. My arm fell to the ground. The exposed air burned my flesh. I was panting and crying. The pain was more than enough to make me go insane. I bowed my head, grabbing my arm. I wanted to puke. I was holding my own mutilated arm. I held my sacrifice over my head. A massive hand lowered itself to me. The weight on my hand vanished as the creature accepted my offering. 2 buds sprouted from its back. The bud on the left began intertwining with my arm in a dance of tendrils. The bud on the right slowly started to darken in color. I gazed up at the creature. Its blank face stared back at me. Then, it slowly lowered my own arm back to me. I was too tired to react. The pain was pulsing all over my body. I felt something stab my torso. I wanted to scream, but I was too tired. I had no energy. I lied there on the ground. My own fingers began clawing their art in my entrails. The last thing I saw before I blacked out was a kaleidoscope of hands around a blank face. I woke up in a hospital bed. Instantly, I felt numbing pain in my left shoulder and stomach. I winced as I looked around. The room was dimly lit. There was a window to my left. The sun was high up in the sky. It was noon most likely. Rise and shine. I heard a familiar voice. Sitting on a chair at the edge of my bed was Officer Clark. He gave a smile. I took a good look at the cheeky bastard. Clark had a few papers in his hand. He put a paper on the desk beside my bed. It was my resignation. Congratulations on being the first person to survive the trails. You knew, I said. I felt an overwhelming urge to strangle him. You knew all along, you fucking bastard. Yes, Clark began scribbling on a notepad. I saw your men dump the girl's body back into the woods. I tried to get up, but the pain kept me down. You called for a folly search group knowing it wasn't worth shit. You're the reason my friends are dead. Officer Clark averted his gaze from his notepad. Given the circumstances, your services as a ranger are no longer required. You are required to sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding your experiences in the park. You will receive due compensation. Don't fucking ignore me, I growled. Yes, Clark said solemnly. We are aware of the anomaly. Why are you keeping it a secret? I asked. Because this is the only way we have to contain it. He replied, "We don't know the full extent of its capabilities. For 15 years, it's prowled these woods, taking a steady supply of victims. We don't know what it'll do or where it'll go if we quarantine the park, and it stops getting regular victims." I stared at Clark in disbelief. "You've seen what it can do. We have neither the methods nor resources to neutralize it." He put another paper on the desk. "We give it what it wants. That's all I'll tell you. Sign this NDA, take your money, and get out of here as soon as you can." I looked out the window. The fog spread about way off in the distance. "One last thing," Clark said. "How did you survive it? I need you to give me all the details." I looked at my left shoulder. "I gave it what it wanted, just like you did." Clark was perplexed. I noticed the bandages on my stomach, the cuts. They formed a lowercase I. However, the circular formation of lines around the eye was missing. "No, I merely gave an advance payment," I said, "and I don't know how much longer I have before it comes back for the next installment." Officer Clark collected his things and stood up. "All hail the many-armed God," he said sarcastically. "The sun is slowly setting in the horizon as I'm sitting here writing this. There are other patients in here with me, so I hope I'll live through the night. I paid for my life. I should be allowed to live. But the mark on my stomach is incomplete. And somewhere in the dark bowels of that cursed forest, a black bud of flesh is waiting for my right arm. I'm going to get out of here the moment I'm discharged. Fuck being a park ranger. I'm going to live out whatever days I have left far away from the wilderness, however long that is." I look out the window into the ever-darkening void within the trees. From the bushes far away, I see a long arm slowly emerge. Its fingers curl, slowly beckoning me, calling me back into the forest. It's my own left arm. Thank you to my super fans, Sweet Black Swan, Tacy, and Brooklyn. I really appreciate you guys supporting my channel, and I look forward to making more content for everyone.